Okay, so I want to do a part 2 video here for whipping as a driving technique. If you haven't seen the first video on whipping, I'd go watch that first before you watch this one. So I'm assuming that you've already watched that video already, okay? So what motivated this part 2 is one of my friends who's also a viewer to this channel mentioned to me that when he whips his car, when he's been practicing whipping, that he found that when he applies brake on the initial phase of the whip and then throttle towards the end in his two-wheel drive buggy, he gets more of a whip than if he just coasted through it, okay? And so here I'm going to explain how that happens. What are the physics that actually drive this? So again, we have this top-down diagram of the car. We're assuming the same test case, if you will, that I went over in the first video where you have a jump going into a right-hand turn. So in the first phase of the whip, you want to turn away from the turn towards the left, okay? So in that first phase, okay, you turn to the left, front wheels are freewheeling, so let's assume they have zero friction, so they spin at the same speed, they're not losing speed throughout the jump. And the rear wheels are also spinning, assuming you're coasting over the jump, okay? So your angular momentum vectors are basically, they're along the axis of rotation of the wheels. So for, say, the left front, that's going to point back this way. For the left rear, it's going to point out this way, and then likewise for the right front and the right rear. So if we treat these as a free body diagram, what does the left see and what does the right see? The left sees this force vector from the front wheel and then this force vector from the rear wheel. Based on the angle of these two and the intensity, you're going to sum those together and you end up with this blue force vector here. And then likewise on the right-hand side, you end up with this blue force vector pointing out this way. So that's going to result in a net force that's causing the car to rotate this way, okay? And by the way, I'm assuming here that the rear wheels have zero toe angle, because that will, if I have like more toe in, this force vector, instead of pointing completely out, it's going to point, up this way a little bit. So we're ignoring toe on the rear, okay? So what happens when you apply brake in a two-wheel drive buggy on the initial phase of the whip where you're turning away from the corner? Well, what that does is, let's assume we apply full brake and that makes the rear wheels stop spinning completely. Well, if the rear wheels aren't spinning, there's zero angular momentum. And so the entirety of the angular momentum in this system is defined entirely by the front wheels. So what that would mean is that these blue vectors, as the rear wheel speed drops and the intensity of this vector goes down, this blue vector, the sum vector, asymptotically approaches the red vector. So what that means is that you're going to have, you could say the same intensity of force, but the angle of the force is approaching the angle of the front wheels because these wheels aren't spinning anymore when I apply brakes. So that's going to make the car turn more in the air, okay? And so what you want to do if you want to accentuate the whip in a two-wheel drive buggy or truck is, you go off the jump, and then you apply brake as soon as you can, and then you turn away from the jump and forward the jump, and that will basically eliminate the effect of the rear wheels in disturbing, if you will, or influencing the total angular momentum that the car has on the left and right sides, okay? So then what also happens though when you apply brake is that the car, it isn't just going left to right, it's also going to pitch forward, right? Because when you apply brake, you're basically applying an instantaneous reverse torque to the rear wheels that's going to pitch the car forward. So what you have to do is treat this in phases. So the first step in, or the first phase in the whip process, again, two-wheel drive chassis, you take the jump, and then once you're in the air, you hit the brakes. Okay, so the car is going to dive forward. As you hit the brakes, you would want to, at the same time, turn away from the corner. So the car is going to dive forward, and it's going to start turning to the left, okay? And then with the brakes still on, you turn back toward the corner, and the car is going to turn to the right, okay? And now that, because the car is pitched down, you need to level the car out or get it at the right angle for the landing on the jump, right? So step 2 is you make the turn. Step 3, you turn back into the corner. And then step 4, or phase 4, is you apply throttle to readjust the pitch of the car. So this is a more complex process because you have to not only wire your brain to turn away from the corner and then back towards the corner when you're whipping, but you also have to wire your brain to apply brake first and then throttle later to accentuate the whip and then readjust the pitch of the car upon landing. In a two-wheel drive buggy. In a four-wheel drive buggy, this is a different process, because in a four-wheel drive buggy, both the front and rear wheels are driven at the same speed 99% of the time, right? Some four-wheel drive chassis have like an overdrive, gear, so you can like drive the front wheels at a higher speed than rear wheels, but we're ignoring that, right? Let's assume that we have equal gear ratio from the motor to the front wheels and the motor to the rear wheels in a four-wheel drive buggy. So what happens there? That means that these force vectors are the same ratio in their intensity between the front and rear wheels. So if I use the same technique in a four-wheel drive buggy to whip as in a two-wheel drive buggy, I actually won't whip. Because what happens in two-wheel drive, I go in the air and then I hit the brakes and turn away from the corner to basically isolate the front wheels to pivot the car around in the air, right? And the four-wheel drive buggy, if I hit the brakes, then all four wheels stop spinning right away. And that means all of these force vectors go to zero. Okay, and that means if I have no force vector, I have no force that's going to actually move the car in the air. So in a four-wheel drive buggy, instead of braking to accentuate the whip, I would actually want to accelerate. So if I accelerate, this vector and this vector grow, right? So even though the actual sum of those two, this blue vector, is always at the same angle in that case, by applying throttle, I'm making it grow in intensity. Okay, and then that growth in intensity on either side is going to have a net effect of, forcing the car to pivot more to the left and then the right in the air. Okay, so it's a different effect, right? In two-wheel drive buggy, you hit the brakes to change the angle of the force vector. In four-wheel drive buggy, you hit the throttle to change the intensity of the force vector, because again, front wheels are also driven by the motor in a four-wheel drive buggy. So what else does that mean? In a four-wheel drive buggy, if I want a really strong whip, I, take off the jump, I hit the throttle. Instead of the nose dipping down, it's going to pitch up, right? So I hit throttle and, whip the car. So the nose is kind of doing this, and I'm whipping with the nose kind of up a bit. And then I hit the brake to level the car for the jump. So the throttle sequence is reversed in a four-wheel drive buggy, but the turning sequence away from the corner and then towards the corner is the same. Okay, so one of the tricks to whipping, if you really want to get into it, is being able to switch your mind between four-wheel drive buggy and two-wheel drive buggy if you're running both classes and you want to whip in both classes in the same event, in the same day. So that's another challenge to whipping. Okay, but anyway, that's the physics, at least qualitatively speaking, and I hope this helps, and thanks for watching.